Welcome to Dark Character Profiler. Take a deep dive into the background and personalities of villains from books, video games, manga, and comics. Psychological analysis of some of the most deviant and heinous characters of all time. Now, here's Fulcrum.
Every story has a villain, but not every villain is simple. Welcome to Dark Character Profiler, the podcast where we examine fictional characters through psychology, trauma, and moral fracture. Here, we go beyond good and evil to ask harder questions. What shaped them? What broke them? And at what point does survival become monstrosity?
Dark Character Profiler.
Listener discretion is advised. This episode includes discussions of severe psychological trauma, violence, abuse, and exploitation. All analysis is presented for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute professional diagnosis, psychological treatment, or medical advice. The material is examined analytically and without glorification, but it may still be distressing. If you need to pause, skip, or step away, please do so.
Dark Character Profile.
Welcome to the Dark Archive Bureau, sometimes called the Archive, where I, Fulcrum, dissect the minds behind cases most people would rather leave closed. Not every case in the archive is something I go looking for. Some cases are brought to my attention by others. Gateway is Julian Mercer. He makes sure only the right cases reach me, and this one did. This indicates the selection process was intentional and thoroughly considered. The decision was deliberate. The submission was unclassified and lacked institutional endorsement or a formal report. The request was straightforward. A concerned citizen asserted this individual required further investigation. The file was designated under the requester's name, S. Donovan Croft. No professional credentials or institutional affiliations were provided. The submission contained only a profile and one question. Who is Agent 80? Mercer refers cases exclusively when they are deemed significant. This case merits a comprehensive examination. Let's begin. Upon reviewing Agent 80's file, I was not initially struck by violence. It was the absence of identity. There was no personal name, clear origin, or emotional footprint associated with his operations. Just a designation, 80. A numerical designation had replaced personal identity. This is the first psychological indicator. Most antagonists construct their identities around recognition, power, fear, or reputation, seeking to make their presence known. 80 operates differently. His influence extends through covert networks and controlled environments, where personal identity is unnecessary and potentially hazardous. He does not seek dominance through presence. Instead, he exerts control by managing information. This distinction is significant. When identity is replaced by function, psychological changes occur. Empathy diminishes, accountability weakens, and decision-making becomes mechanical. The question is not simply what 80 does. The central question is, what mindset can function comfortably while remaining unseen? We examine 80's file to understand the psychology of an individual who has replaced identity with mission, autonomy with control, and humanity with efficiency. Background information. Agent 80 did not begin as an ordinary soldier or intelligence operative. He originated as a manufactured weapon. 80 is a human clone originating from Core Prime, genetically derived from a long-dead ancestor of Baron Thrang, one of the most lethal members of the Jim Zadir, an elite order of assassin monks serving the Myzerian death cult. This origin is essential. 80 was not merely trained to kill. He was engineered and conditioned within a culture that regards killing as a sacred duty. Within the Myzerian faith, the Jim Zadir operate as instruments of divine will. Their role is absolute. Eliminate the assigned target or die in the attempt. Failure is not tolerated. Those who return without completing their mission are subjected to slow execution. From the beginning, 80 exists within a system where identity, morality, and survival are inseparable from obedience. His early life is characterized by extreme conditioning. Before joining the Carathian Imperial Secret Police, 80 served as a Jim Zadir bodyguard assigned to Baron Thrang. Among these elite assassins, he distinguished himself by his independence rather than obedience. This independence almost became a liability. Instead of eliminating him, influential cult members chose a different course. 80 was sent to train with the Agnashi, one of the most lethal mercenary orders in the known galaxy, where his combat abilities and tactical instincts were refined further. After this training, he was reassigned to the Carathian Imperial Secret Police, where members of the Jim Zadir operate as elite enforcers within the regime. By the time 80 enters the narrative, he is no longer just a cult assassin. He is the product of multiple conditioning systems: cult ideology, genetic legacy, military discipline, and intelligence operations. The result is an individual who appears relaxed and even amicable on the surface, yet whose life is structured entirely around violence. Trauma history. Unlike many antagonists whose trauma results from loss or deprivation, 80's trauma stems from indoctrination and conditioning. The training environment of the Jim Zadir is intentionally brutal. Acolytes undergo severe psychological conditioning intended to eliminate fear, attachment, and hesitation. At one stage, initiates have their eyes sewn shut, forcing them to exist in complete darkness. The purpose is not punishment, it is transformation. By removing sensory stability and requiring acolytes to function through pain and disorientation, the cult conditions its assassins to operate without reliance on comfort or normal perception. For most individuals, this kind of experience would produce severe psychological distress. For 80, this experience is normalized. Over time, repeated exposure to violence and strict ideological control reshape the individual's emotional framework. Empathy is viewed as weakness, hesitation as failure, and attachment as vulnerability. In this environment, 80 learns that the mission is the only reliable structure in his life. Instead of breaking under the pressure, he adapts. The result is a psychological profile that does not display conventional signs of trauma. Instead, trauma becomes integrated into his identity. Violence no longer feels abnormal, it becomes routine. Mental state. 80's mental state reflects a rare combination of emotional calm and underlying volatility. He generally appears relaxed, even casual, and often treats violent environments as routine. This outward composure does not reflect emotional stability. It is the result of emotional conditioning. Years of cult training and operational experience have conditioned him to suppress emotional responses that might hinder efficiency. Anger, fear, and hesitation are minimized. What remains is a narrow emotional range dominated by calculation and control. However, there is an important exception. On rare occasions, 8-0 erupts into sudden, lethal violence, killing prisoners or subordinates during moments of anger. These events are not frequent. When these incidents occur, they are severe. This suggests a psychological system in which aggression is usually regulated through discipline, yet remains present beneath the surface. The calm exterior is real. However, it is not permanent. It serves as a form of containment. Fulcrum's personality breakdown, the hurricane scale. Before examining 8-0's motivations in detail, we must review the emotional patterns that shape his behavior. The hurricane scale measures emotional pressure, indicating how internal forces influence decision-making over time. The scale ranges from Category 1, representing manageable emotions, to Category 5, indicating complete internal upheaval. 8-0's psychological state appears deceptively calm. However, calm does not indicate stability. It reflects containment. Imagination and insight, Category 4. 8-0 demonstrates strong analytical perception. He quickly assesses environments, identifies leverage points, and anticipates reactions. This situational insight enables effective operations in complex political and intelligence contexts. However, this insight is instrumental, not empathetic. He understands people well enough to predict their actions, not necessarily relate to them. Control and order, Category 5. Control appears to be 8-0's dominant psychological driver. His behavior indicates a strong preference for structured environments where variables are managed and outcomes are predictable. Unexpected developments rarely result in emotional outbursts. Instead, such events prompt increased efforts to regain operational control. Social energy, Category 2. 8-0 interacts with others only when necessary for mission execution. His social behavior is functional rather than relational. Conversations are brief, direct, and focused on objectives. As a result, he maintains a limited emotional network with few relationships beyond operational requirements. Compassion and cooperation, Category 2. 8-0 is capable of cooperation when it aligns with mission requirements. However, there is little evidence that compassion influences decision-making. This does not necessarily indicate cruelty. More often, it reflects a prioritization of objectives. Human considerations become secondary when they conflict with operational goals. And unpredictability, Category 3. 8-0's behavior is usually calculated. However, individuals who suppress emotions extensively may display sudden behavioral shifts when accumulated stress exceeds their internal thresholds. When this occurs, the change can be abrupt, as emotional pressure may have built up over an extended period. Moral beliefs. 8-0's moral framework is strictly instrumental. Rather than viewing actions through traditional moral categories such as right and wrong, he evaluates decisions through a different lens. Effectiveness. Does the action accomplish the objective? Does it protect the system he serves? Does it reduce risk to the mission? If the answer is yes, moral conflict is minimal. This type of moral reasoning often develops within hierarchical institutions that reward loyalty and obedience rather than ethical debate. Over time, individuals internalize organizational goals as their own. The distinction between personal belief and institutional doctrine disappears. For 8.0, morality is procedural, not philosophical. Relationships. 8.0's interpersonal world is highly limited. He does not form traditional friendships or emotional bonds. Trust is reserved almost exclusively for fellow Jim Zadir members. This is not accidental. Within the cult's ideology, loyalty is earned through shared training, beliefs, and a willingness to die for the mission. Those outside this structure are regarded with suspicion or indifference. Consequently, most of 8.0's interactions fall into three categories. The first, superiors who give orders. Second, subordinates who carry them out. And third, targets who must be eliminated. He appears to trust only those who share his indoctrinated perspective. Even then, this trust remains conditional. Within Jim Zadir philosophy, loyalty persists only while the mission continues. Historical parallels. Agent 8.0's psychological profile, which combines institutional loyalty, emotional detachment, and operational precision, closely resembles several real-world figures who operated within intelligence and covert power structures. These individuals were not driven solely by ideology or cruelty. They were shaped by systems that rewarded secrecy, discipline, and emotional restraint. Examining their behavior helps explain how someone like 8.0 could emerge. Marcus Wolf. One of the most effective intelligence leaders of the Cold War was Marcus Wolf, head of East Germany's Foreign Intelligence Service. Wolf became known as the man without a face because Western intelligence agencies struggled for years to even identify what he looked like. That level of anonymity was not accidental. Wolf understood that power in intelligence work often comes from invisibility. The less visible one's personal identity, the more freely the operative can maneuver. Psychologically, this causes a shift in self-perception. The individual stops viewing themselves as a public figure or even as a person with a reputation to maintain. Instead, they become the architect of outcomes. This same pattern is evident in 8.0's behavior. His influence operates quietly, with minimal personal exposure, suggesting a mindset that values control without recognition. Oleg Penkovsky. Another useful comparison comes from Soviet military intelligence officer Oleg Penkovsky. Penkovsky's life illustrates how profoundly intelligence systems can reshape identity. Operating inside rigid hierarchies of secrecy and surveillance, Penkovsky lived under constant pressure to maintain loyalty while navigating internal power struggles within his own institution. Individuals in that environment often develop significant compartmentalization. Personal emotions, beliefs, and relationships must be separated from operational duties to function effectively. Over time, this compartmentalization becomes habitual. The individual no longer switches between identities. They simply operate in the role the system has defined for them. 8.0 appears to reflect this same pattern of compartmentalized identity. His operational role has become the dominant psychological structure guiding behavior. Aldrich Ames. The case of Aldrich Ames, a CIA officer who became one of the most damaging spies in American intelligence history, offers insight into another psychological dimension of covert work: moral drift. Ames did not begin his career intending to betray his country. However, prolonged exposure to intelligence operations, where deception, secrecy, and manipulation are routine tools, gradually reshaped his ethical boundaries. Actions that once felt morally unacceptable began to feel operationally justified. This gradual erosion of moral clarity is common in environments where secrecy and strategic thinking are prioritized over personal conscience. 8-Zero's decision making follows a similar pattern. His behavior suggests that mission success has become the primary ethical metric, replacing traditional moral considerations. And finally, another historical figure of note is Richard Sorge, a Soviet intelligence officer operating in Japan before World War II. Sorge successfully embedded himself within elite political circles while secretly transmitting critical intelligence to Moscow. Sorge's effectiveness stemmed not only from his intelligence gathering, but also from his ability to maintain multiple identities simultaneously. To those around him, he appeared to be a journalist and political insider. To Soviet intelligence, he was a strategic asset. Maintaining this level of dual identity requires significant psychological discipline. The operative must continually suppress personal authenticity in favor of the role performed. Over time, the boundary between these identities can begin to blur. 8-Zero's designation suggests a similar psychological phenomenon. When identity is replaced with a code name, the individual's sense of self can gradually merge with the operational role. The agent becomes the mask.
And now, the final analysis. But first, just a little house cleaning.
Before we examine the crimes and potential diagnoses, a brief reminder. This analysis is presented for educational and entertainment purposes only.
Dark character profile.
Criminal behavior. Agent 8-Zero's criminal behavior differs from that of a typical antagonist, whose actions are driven by anger, ambition, or personal ideology. Instead, 8-Zero's actions are procedural. Violence, manipulation, and deception are not expressions of emotional states. They are tools used to achieve operational objectives. This distinction matters. Most criminal behavior reveals something about the perpetrator's emotional world, such as revenge, desperation, fear, or greed. In 8-Zero's case, these emotional drivers are largely absent. What emerges instead is instrumental criminality. Actions are taken not because they are desired, but because they are effective. This produces a behavioral pattern often seen in highly structured covert environments. Control, strategic deception, covert surveillance, targeted elimination of obstacles, and institutional loyalty prioritized over individual ethics. Each action serves a specific purpose within the larger operational system. There is little evidence of cruelty for its own sake. However, there is also little evidence that moral hesitation slows 8-Zero's actions. This combination of emotional detachment and calculated decision making creates a form of criminal behavior that is particularly difficult to predict or prevent. Because the individual committing the act does not appear to be acting for personal reasons, they act for the mission. When mission success becomes the only meaningful metric, the moral boundaries that typically regulate behavior begin to disappear. Psychological testing. If Agent 8-Zero underwent modern psychological testing, the results would reveal a personality shaped by extreme institutional conditioning, suppressed empathy, and highly functional aggression. Trauma and stress response. High conditioning. 80's early cult training likely involved prolonged exposure to psychological stress intended to eliminate fear and hesitation. Rather than producing traditional trauma responses, this environment appears to have normalized violence and emotional detachment. Stress does not destabilize him. It activates the behavioral patterns he was trained to use. Impulsivity, low to moderate. Most of 80's actions are calculated and tactical. However, occasional violent outbursts suggest that aggression remains present beneath the surface and can emerge when emotional control lapses. Empathy, severely inhibited. 80 appears capable of understanding the emotions of others. However, those emotions rarely influence his decisions. Human life is treated as expendable, and violence is sometimes experienced as enjoyable. Moral reasoning, absent. 80 does not appear to operate under a personal moral code. His decisions are guided almost entirely by mission directives and cult ideology. When moral frameworks exist, they are external rather than internal. Grandiosity, moderate. 80 displays confidence in his combat ability and tactical skill, sometimes bordering on overconfidence. However, this confidence does not manifest as the admiration seeking behavior typical of narcissistic personalities. Identity stability, role fused. 80's identity is deeply fused with his role as a Jim Zadir and CISP commander. Without that structure, there is little evidence that a separate personal identity would remain. Diagnostic breakdown. Everything discussed so far explains how Agent 80 behaves. Now, we need to understand how those behaviors translate psychologically and where they fall within modern clinical frameworks. First, antisocial personality disorder. DSM 5 TR requirements. A pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others since age 15, indicated by 3 or more of the following. Criterion 1. Failure to conform to lawful behavior. 80 routinely participates in killings, torture, and covert violent operations as part of the Carathian Imperial Secret Police. Criteria met. Criterion 2. Deceitfulness. His operational role involves deception, infiltration, and manipulation of targets. Criterion met. Criterion 3. Impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. 80 generally behaves in a calculated and tactical manner rather than impulsively. Criterion not met. Criterion 4. Irritability and aggressiveness. Although typically calm, he occasionally erupts into sudden lethal violence against prisoners or subordinates. Criterion met. Criterion 5. Reckless disregard for safety of others. 80 demonstrates a complete disregard for the lives of targets, prisoners, and civilians. Criterion met. Criterion 6. Consistent irresponsibility. His loyalty is directed toward the cult and the CISP rather than social obligations or legal norms. Criterion met. Criterion 7. Lack of remorse. 80 is described as enjoying inflicting pain and killing, threatening violence almost like a game. Criterion met. Diagnostic threshold. 80 meets 6 of 7 criteria. Diagnosis: antisocial personality disorder. Second, sadistic personality features, non-DSM clinical concept. While sadistic personality disorder was removed after the DSM-3 revised, it remains a widely recognized behavioral construct. Evidence includes enjoyment of inflicting pain, killing treated as entertainment, psychological intimidation of targets, and mocking victims during violent encounters. 80 is specifically noted to enjoy inflicting pain and killing. He thrives on it. Clinical concept, sadistic personality traits. Cult conditioned identity structure. 80's identity appears heavily shaped by the Jim Zadir death cult training structure. Indicators include identity defined through rank and designation, absolute loyalty to the miseries and the cult hierarchy, willingness to die rather than fail a mission, and trust limited only to fellow cult members. This reflects a phenomenon documented in studies of extreme ideological or militant conditioning, where identity becomes inseparable from institutional purpose. Clinical concept, cult conditioned identity structure. Diagnoses considered but ruled out. These diagnoses were considered but do not appear supported by the available evidence. Narcissistic personality disorder, not met. 80 does not display the classic features of narcissistic pathology. Missing indicators include need for admiration, fragile self-esteem, and obsession with recognition. Instead, 80 appears largely indifferent to social recognition. Post-traumatic stress disorder, not met. Although his cult training environment was likely traumatic, there is no evidence of intrusive memories, avoidance behaviors, hypervigilance, or trauma-related emotional dysregulation. His behavior appears stable and controlled rather than trauma-driven. Obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, not met. 80 shows tactical discipline but lacks hallmark OCPD features such as perfectionism interfering with productivity, excessive moral rigidity, and compulsive order maintenance. His operational behavior is efficient rather than compulsively structured. Final impressions. When I close Agent 80's file, what remains with me is not the violence. It is the absence of resistance. There is no moment in his story where he hesitates, questions, or struggles with what he is becoming, because there was never anything to resist. 80 was not broken into his role. He was built for it. From the beginning, his life was structured around a single idea, that existence has value only when it serves a purpose, and that purpose is defined by someone else. The Jim Zadir did not teach him how to kill. They taught him that killing was the only thing that mattered. They removed the need for doubt, the space for empathy, and the possibility of choice. In that absence, something else took root. Not just obedience, not just discipline, but enjoyment. When violence becomes routine and routine becomes identity, the mind does not simply accept it, it adapts to it. 80 does not kill because he is angry or afraid. He kills because to him it feels natural. Over time, it begins to feel like something more, something closer to satisfaction. That is what makes him unsettling. It is not that he lacks morality, but that morality was never part of his design. It is not that he suppresses empathy, but that empathy was systematically removed before it could take hold. He is not conflicted, fractured, or at war with himself. He is complete. That completeness is what makes him dangerous. Most people, no matter how far they fall, still carry some version of who they used to be. 80 does not. There is no before. There is no lost version of himself to return to, no buried conscience waiting to surface. He is simply a man who understands exactly what he is and moves through the world without hesitation. In the end, Agent 80 is not a warning about what happens when someone loses their humanity. He is a reflection of what happens when humanity is never given a chance to exist. That is what makes him different from most villains. He is not a man who became a monster. He is a weapon that learned to enjoy being used.
Dark Character Profile.
Dark Character Profiler is produced and edited by Fulcrum under Dark Fulcrum Media. If you enjoyed this episode, consider following the show or sharing it with someone who loves psychology, storytelling, and morally complex characters. You can find links, references, and related material in the show notes. Until next time, remember, the most terrifying monsters are rarely born. They're shaped.
Thank you for listening to Dark Character Profiler with Fulcrum. Listen every other Tuesday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Podcasts. Humanity was not meant to live this way. Society is left to the mercy of murderers and cutthroats. Hear Paige Zaplin Dam's epic tale brought to life in an audiobook. For years, Slade had felt secure in the forest. I am from simple, humble beginnings. I was raised in the Ironwood by an ogress, an Anaral. He saw immediately that she was beyond a healer's aid. Even a skilled witch could not help her recover from losing so much blood. Mother? Slade thought he wanted revenge. Instead, he got redemption. A kingdom of ash and steam, The Ogress's Son, a dystopian neo-Dark Age fantasy, narrated by Rich Frazier. Now available on iTunes and Audible. I promise you I will find whoever did this and avenge you, Mother.